page. And so I'm just going to introduce Ramsey. He's going to talk today about CSS modules versus inline styles. And I'll let you take it away.
Cool. How about this? Yeah. Does this work? You guys hear me? Does this work?
One more time.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. All right. This is a pretty good turnout here.
Relax.
Woo! I hope I haven't hurt anyone's feelings here because I'm going to hate on inline styles pretty hard. So anyway, my name's Ramsey. I'm a developer at a creative agency here in DC called Include. I've been using React for probably about a year now or so, and so I will be talking about CSS modules. Quick poll: who is actually using CSS modules or has even heard of CSS modules? Okay. I mean, who's using inline styles right now with React apps? Everyone else just using like basic CSS stuff? Cool. So I'm a front-end developer by trade, and the hardest part of my job is always CSS. CSS is globally scoped. It's just really hard to manage. So I came across CSS modules specifically with React. This is on the internet. So this is, first of all, let's talk about why people are using inline styles, or what problems they solve. So with inline styling, you get scope styling. So it's nice you have all your styles in your component. It's really nice. You don't have to worry about specificity conflicts. That kind of goes along with scope styling, but and dead code elimination. So you don't have to worry about repeated styles conflicts. There's some other reasons too, but these are all generally considered pretty bad things. What most people hate about CSS. Taylor Swift. Yes, for a second. But there's some problems with inline style. How do you do hover states? You guys got a second. But pseudo selectors, things like first of type, nth of type, even pseudo elements like before and after are not possible with inline style. You can't. There's no classes, so you can't do anything. You can't take advantage of class composition, which I'll get into in a second as well. And I personally use Sass, but if you use Less or Stylus or Post CSS, any of those precompilers, you can't leverage any of that stuff. So some things that Sass give you are variable, stuff like that. Obviously, JavaScript will give you some of that. You can do some nice, you can do more advanced math in JavaScript, so you can make like really complex grids, I guess, if you want, using inline styles, which you can't necessarily do with CSS. So there's something called Radium. I don't know, has anyone heard of Radium or using Radium? Okay. So Radium basically takes hover states and active states in that and gives you that inline styling. And so you can kind of see, let me bump this up a little bit. Great, I can't. Well, this is like an example straight from Radium's website. So yeah, I'll just point you down here. You can do things like hover states. I'm sorry, I can't make it any bigger. Next slides. But you can see like you can do hover states here with Radium and inline styles. You can even do things like changing. I mean, I think this is ugly, but you can take a color and light it and convert it to a texture. So if you look at this, the Sass would be like just light and then the color. So Radium's pretty neat. It gives you that. But if it still doesn't handle, like you still can't do first of type or last of type or anything like that. So like how would you actually do that using inline styles? You'd have to do something like this. Again, it's pretty small. But basically what you're doing is you're taking, assuming your view is getting passed in props that are listed buttons, and you want to render them. So you render it through a loop, and you have to check if the index is 0, it's the first one, then you apply a different class to it. And like this is all this, like you have to do all of this just to be able to style the first element differently. It gets kind of tedious. Where in CSS you can just, with that class name, just do first type and you get that. So to me, this is pretty hard to swallow having to do all this stuff. So this is my case for using CSS modules. So I'm going to go through, I created a boilerplate that's going to use Webpack, Node server with Express, and it's basically what it says on. Who's using Webpack or Browserify or something like that? Okay, most people using Webpack, cool. I included the Webpack setup here. There's not really, I'm not going to go through all the way, but the important thing to note is your loaders here. So basically what's happening is I'm using Sass, so everyone's familiar, or whoever's using Webpack is familiar with how loaders work. Your normal CSS loader. What it does is it takes every Sass file, and using a plugin, it extracts the style, and then you name it. So basically, what CSS modules is going to do for you is generate class names for all your components based on a locally scoped CSS or Sass file. I'll show you this in detail, but it's really awesome. It's really powerful, and the benefit is it will actually create a CSS file for you. CSS files are great because they're cacheable. They don't block, they don't block loading or anything like that. And you get classes. You get to use the cascade, which is nice if you know how to use it correctly. And then the node server is pretty straightforward. I don't think there's anything here. Okay, so I want you guys to watch this GIF. It has nothing to do with anything, but look at this guy. He's sleeping, and his baby's about to fall. That is amazing to me. I GIF search examples to find a funny GIF, and this is the first one to show up. So that's all I have. Okay. So I'm going to get into so this is basically what the boilerplate will load for you. I'm going to show you how easy it is to style all this stuff. I did on Meetup. I did post a link to the repo if you guys want to follow along at all. You can pull that down, but here it is right here. So I think that's as big as I can make it. Is that very good? Back there, everyone? Good? Cool. So there's nothing that fancy going on here. I have, really basic implementation of React Router, which is loading. It goes through the app, which is really not doing anything. Calls a homepage app, and so it's just rendering. I probably wouldn't recommend doing it this way, but for brevity's sake, it's just rendering 4 sections, and that's each one of those columns. The important thing to note is on the page component, which is kind of like a wrapping component. So this is how CSS modules work from a technical standpoint. You import React CSS modules, which is some guy created like a better way to work with CSS modules through React. And it's really nice. And then you have this decorator here. So what it's doing is it's importing styles from your Sass file, which looks like this. Okay? So, and then you use style name equals base. Instead of class name, it's style name. So what that's going to do is it's going to look for a class name in your Sass file called base. And then it's going to generate a CSS class for you. Now, one thing I want to note is, see this thing called composes, that's going to be new to you. You probably never seen that before. So the awesome thing about this is you can compose different classes together. I'm pulling in a class called container from the Flexbox Sass file, which looks like this. So really all it does is display flex. But what it actually generates is, you guys see that? It writes my class names for me. So, you can see here, page base, it's got all my pages, and then Flexbox container. There's no dead code anywhere. I mean, this is a really contrived example, but there's no dead code anywhere, and these classes can all be reused elsewhere. And also, you don't have like a bunch of ugly inline style everywhere. So that looks kind of cool, but it actually gets better when you look at a section, when you look at the actual section. So if you, so you see here, I'm passing in a prop called type. So this is basically going to be how it determines what color to use. So we got primary, secondary, dark, and tertiary. And then I'm also passing in a background image for one of them, which actually isn't good. So sections, it's the exact same thing. I'm importing styles from sections. And then I'm so for style name, it takes the type that you pass in, props, which is in there, and then it determines whether you have a background image or not, and then we'll add in a background image class. Now, you'll see I have a style here to add the background image. There's really no way around that. But the sections class, the sections looks like this. So it's composing a bunch of stuff. So you can have a base class, and the beauty of this is you don't have to remember any of your class names. Like you can name every component, you can start with base and then add on to it. You don't have to, like, if you're familiar with like Atomic CSS, where you have like one class for one style, which is nice when you're writing markup, but it gets really, really cumbersome when you have to remember like what pt-b __2 means. So here you start with base class. You import a bunch of different classes from Flexbox. So I'm importing all of these from Flexbox. This is basically like kind of the tenet of Atomic CSS. You have one class, one style. Here you go. And then I'm pulling in, and this basically just determines which color to make the component. And then if it's got a background, you import like a cover class, which makes it full width, position center, stuff like that. And here's what you don't get with inline styles. You can do pseudo elements. This is Sass. So if you're not familiar with Sass, it's basically the same thing. It's just so you can add pseudo elements and all that stuff. It's great. And then for the titles and all that stuff. So that is how CSS modules work. Very, very easy, very simple. Getting them to work very efficiently takes some planning, I would say. But to me, it's much more usable than using inline styles. So that's actually it. It's a pretty short talk, but I know we're gonna have some questions. So I hope you have some questions. So I will turn to Beyonce and ask who's got questions. Are there questions? Yes, sir.
So it looks like in your code example that you're using a decorator sometimes. Mm-hmm. Is that actually part of ES6, or do you have to do some kind of extension to that to get that to work?
Yeah, no, that's part of. I think that's actually part of ES7, but I'm not using any, so if you're familiar with Babel, the only Babel plugins I'm using, if you're using Babel 5, I think this is the new version, you have to use presets for everything. So the Babel RC is not using anything out of the ordinary. It's ES 2015 React and then stage 0, which is pretty standard from what I've seen. It might be something, so that decorator is what's given to you by that React CSS modules, NPM modules, so.
It's just to be clear, stage 0 is the definition of we hope it someday might become a standard.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So, yeah. There's if you look at the documentation for that plugin, there's other ways to do it. I was actually, you can put it down here in your export. There's a way to do it that way. I'd actually been working with WordPress and using WordPress with React and GraphQL and Relay, so I couldn't do an export because I was exporting the container as a Relay container. So that's why I was using a decorator. So I kind of copied this example, dumbed it down, took out GraphQL and Relay, and this is what I got. So more questions? Yes.
Could you show us like the class naming thing again and maybe like explain?
Sure.
that a little bit more?
So it's probably easier if you look at something that's got like the title. So see all these classes.
So it's just like doing element underscore class name.
Yeah, and you can change how it actually names it. So it's basically taking the type, the name of the file. So section is called section.css. So it takes that and then it takes the class name and it adds it. So I don't know why I haven't defined that. But and then I've got like a typography file that I'm importing, a bunch of styles for to transform uppercase to general. So there's some section CSS. So the title is importing a bunch of classes: strong, uppercase, center, bold, from typography, and then it's also importing the class subcenter, which does align self center, so it puts it right in the middle. Flexbox is awesome, by the way. If you guys are using Flexbox, definitely check Flexbox out because you can vertically align stuff. So the typography file is right here. So again, it's pretty much the way that I have this set up is I've got a styles folder and then I've got all these files. And I usually pretty much have one class for everything, and then that applies to styles. So that allows me to compose basically a string of different class names. So the output is kind of weird because you can get like 15 different class names, but you don't have to write any of those yourself. You don't have to maintain any. It's basically, so to do this in CSS, you have to do like, you couldn't have so if I named this dark, right, or if I named, if I was using color. Actually, that's so oftentimes I'll have a class called like background underscore primary to just add an underscore primary color background. With this, I can have a background file and name that primary, and then have a text, a typography or colors SAS file, and have a primary class in there. And those classes will be different because the file name is different. It's just, it takes a lot of thought out of having to maintain your CSS.
How intrinsically is the decorator usage coupled to like, I'm having like a little bit of a problem in my mind separating out like where the capabilities of something like Compose butts the use of like CSS modules as a decorator. Is the decorator strictly necessary? I mean, there's probably.
And the way I have this set up, yes, but I can pull up the. This is the GitHub. So if you don't want to use a decorator, you can do this. The reason I wasn't able to do this was I copied my example from Relay. And if anyone's using Relay or GraphQL, you have to export these as a relay container to do all your GraphQL queries. And so I couldn't get this to work, so I used a decorator. So you can do it that way too. There's no difference.
Just FYI, this killed me for, oh, sorry.
Just so everyone can hear.
This like killed me for a while because the TC39 is full decorators. So you actually have a polyfill for your decorator in there. But like, that took me forever to figure it out.
Yeah, I mean, the beauty of it is it's included in this. I didn't write any of it.
Oh, okay.
I don't
It comes
even
in the
really,
package?
yeah, it comes with this, so
Nice.
I'd have to write any decorator. It comes built in. But again, if you don't want to use decorators for whatever reason, you can also just export this. So it's basically the name of your component and then styles with the CSS module, and then you import it at the top.
Can I ask another quick question?
Absolutely.
So in your loaders, I was just wondering why do you separate your CSS loader from your SAS loader?
I think I copied that from a boilerplate probably.
Oh,
I mean, there's really no reason I would. I'd probably just, for brevity, I think I just copied it from somewhere else.
Just wondering.
But I'm not using CSS anywhere. It generates, what it does generate is it generates an app CSS file somewhere. You can see it. So it actually generates a CSS file. Now you can have it not generate a CSS file if you don't want to use a CSS file for whatever reason. And what it'll do is for every module, it will create a style tag in the head, in order like right below the head, and then with all the styles there. So I don't know why you want to do that. I mean, the CSS file is cacheable. The nice thing also is if you're using Webpack, you can create multiple entry points for your application. So if you have like an admin side and a client-facing side, you can have your entire app bundle, your app generated CSS file, all delivered through a CDN and do all sorts of optimizations that way.
So what's the order? What's the order that those things are being interpreted on the loader for the SAS? Is it the CSS module first and then SAS is running, or how does that?
That's a good question. I think the way the loader works, I put this in because I knew someone would ask the question. Again, RDG. I think the way this loader works, if you look in Webpack, the loader, I'll fully admit I copied it. So I don't know. I think this is pretty hard to understand. But basically, what you can tell is it's using this extract text plugin to pull the data out and put it into the CSS file. And it's taking a style. And basically, using localized name, I don't know what that is, but it's basically taking the name of the file __ local. So that's the class thing that it extends. And what I think by adding that is it compiles SAS first, and then it runs the CSS style, the CSS loader. But I'm not entirely sure about the implementation. I just know it works.
So one follow-up then. So the SAS that you've got written here, if you don't have that loader set up, the module loader, or the CSS module loader set up, that SAS will not compile in the project, right?
Correct. Yeah, because I'm not using there's no gulp or anything or grunt or any type of compiler that's running other than what you get in the loaders. And, like, this is pretty much how you would normally compile SAS, but now you have all this stuff that's generating class name.
I have a question first. I'll just add a course of affirmation that it is a right to left application when you have that. So yeah, the first loading of order includes SAS loader. The result of the SAS loader will include CSS loader, etc.
And that's pretty much how it has to work.
And my question is actually Are you familiar with the JSX Styles project?
I've seen it, but I haven't been around it.
Yeah. So the thing that intrigued me about that is that it tries to make your React component your only unit of composition, whereas with some basically the other solution you've got React components that you're composing until you want to do some style composition that is difficult to do in inline, right? And then you start composing in CSS just for that style instead. I was just wondering, like, what you thought of that kind of like what you thought of the goal of JSX styles in trying to like completely get rid of having to use CSS to do any kind of composition and just use JSX.
I'm actually a fan of that. I mean, the one thing that I like, one thing that I really like about inline styles is that everything is in one file, one component. So you don't have to go between files, I guess, essentially. It's basically what that problem is trying to solve. So I'm a big fan of that. I mean, I think that makes workflow easier. I just haven't seen an implementation yet that was as good as this when it comes to actually maintaining styles. I'm willing to sacrifice having to use two files to get this outcome and having to use the current implementation of what I've seen in inline styles. Now, I abandoned inline styles with Radium probably 4 or 5 months ago, so I've been using this, and so I've been focusing on different things. So I'm sure that, I mean, this is such a new technology, and I'm sure there's all sorts of stuff out there that I haven't seen that might be better than this, but I haven't found anything. The JSX styles might be it.
Yeah, I mean, I've been watching the project. It's been kind of stagnant for a few months, but it's the thing I've been watching since it makes sense to me that you would just use JSX to compose every composable element of your application because it's so good at it. But yeah, I think the actual implementation is not there yet.
On this topic, I'd like to see where, I guess one thing I didn't see was where the pseudo stylings were in this, because that always seems like the big deficiency of, at least I'm not aware of how JSX styles deals with, like, you can't inline style pseudo elements, pseudo selectors.
There's an issue open for all that.
So that's one thing I would actually like to see. Like, it seems like we have some pseudo elements in here, and I guess I haven't.
I mean, I think this
hearing this is something that made me realize like we haven't actually seen where they get declared.
Yeah. So what I just did is I made like, I mean, to do that, like I showed you in inline styles.
Can you show us where that shows up in the source?
Yeah. How it shows up?
Yeah.
So it's the same thing, section base and then just first something.
Can you open that CSS, app CSS?
I don't know why it does weird that.
Okay.
Radium also, I mean, Radium lets you do media queries too. So the nice thing about, and I guess you could probably come up with some good breakpoint variables using JavaScript, but if you rely on some sort of CSS-based breakpoint media query system, like I've been a front-end developer for 10 years, so I've got pretty consistent for media queries that I like to use and reuse in projects that are related to me. So with this, I can just pop it right in there and it works.
How much of this gets regenerated when doing like when you're re-rendering elements? Do you know? I guess I'm curious about like performance impact. Like it seems like this whole file has to get regenerated when something's updating.
Yeah, I mean there is.
Thanks, Eric.
It does say it has hot module. I mean, I do have hot module replacement implemented in this boilerplate for the actual JavaScript components. And
that's like for a development cycle, but even just like the application's normal running life cycle, like if you want to change the color of an element live and do some CSS animation, like that's still something that's going to require an update to the style. Like what kind of impacts that's, like the style sheet seems like it's baked out via a loader.
Yeah, I mean, on the development side, on the production side, the CSS file would already be generated.
Right.
So I mean, if you're trying to like live update the style,
yeah,
you would probably, I don't know of an application where that would be useful to replicate across all clients. Besides, I mean, I'm sure you can do it with.
But that does like definitely characterize this solution as a like compile time CSS solution,
Right.
like versus like people do have dynamic dynamic CSS
I
things that
suppose,
you have to do. You have to go a little bit out of band.
I usually think that that's probably on a per client basis, which means that when it's rendering the component anyway, you probably have some setting it's checking or something, or if you're using node sockets to live push something, I mean, it's going to re-render that component with something changed. And I mean, you can always have that style.
You can kind of
I
like,
guess it would require you to have that style pre.
you can go backwards. Like you already know the naming scheme for the styles of the things. So you can just dynamically say what class names explicitly you want in a dynamic fashion, since you already have the style sheet generated.
Right.
So I guess that's a like perfectly viable way to do.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, the argument against that would be that now you have loaded CSS where you're not using, I mean, it's whatever. It might be minimally loaded, but you have styles that you're not using that are being generated. Typically, with this solution, what's really nice about it and elegant is you don't have any dead CSS. It's all being used, and ideally, none of the styles are being overwritten. Which, like, doing with just vanilla CSS is very, very hard to do if you're just writing, global CSS. It's something I struggle with, like when I'm doing WordPress or whatever, and not when I can't use React for a project. Something I struggle with daily.
So let's say you have a project that's already written using global styles, and you'd like to migrate it to using CSS modules like this. What would be the path to actually do that without, completely breaking your application along the way?
Yeah, well, I mean, you have to break it at some point. There's really no,
So is
there's
there
no,
a way to
like-
do, like partial transition from like?
yeah, you absolutely, I mean, if you have a React application, then absolutely you could. I mean, you can do it on a per component basis. I mean, just like if you can have an app where part of the app is React, part of it is Angular if you want it for whatever reason. But yeah, I mean, you can piece it out slowly. Sure. I mean, I've done that on a very small application where I was writing it in CSS, and then I learned about this, and so I kind of implemented that into my application, did it. I didn't really piecemeal it, I kind of did it all at one time, but it took a few days.
What did that process look like though?
It's very annoying. It's very annoying. But now that, like, I mean, the end result, it was worth it because maintaining it became so much easier, especially if you have multiple developers working on it. It's like, you don't have to worry about naming conventions here. Like if you're using BEM or, object-oriented SAS or whatever, or CSS or whatever, like you don't have to worry necessarily about naming conventions. Yes.
Is there a way to share values or variables between CSS and JavaScript?
Yeah, you can do, between that and JavaScript?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure there's probably some solution out there, not that it comes off the top of my head, other than using JavaScript to get a current value and modifying it.
Wait, how can you do that? Get a current value of.
Just get it, just.
So in SAS, if you define a variable, can you import that?
Yeah. Okay, is that what you're asking? Yeah, you can do. So let's say I wanted to do.
I don't think you're presenting to the screen anymore.
Man. All right, give me 1 second.
Sorry.
So I could import. And then.
Sorry, I meant more like, would you be able to pull that into your JavaScript file to get a value?
No. It's going to take, this is SAS, compiles to CSS.
Yep.
So what you get when you, I thought you were talking about importing global variables from SAS and using it. So when you import styles, this is just a JavaScript object with the compiled class names. So you don't have access to any of those styles. I mean, the nice thing about inline styles, I suppose, is that because it's JavaScript, you can do all sorts of math, or you can use the color NPM module and do some like pretty nifty color modifications. But I mean, with Sass, you do have some built-in. You can do fade out, dark and light colors with variables, all sorts of stuff. So it's really similar, I'd say. Yeah.
You were lamenting that you have to set up the style equals BG. Is that because there's no why is that?
I was lamenting on
Under the return statement there, you have style equals BG, like style name equals line 56. Yeah, line 26.
Oh, sorry, I was looking at here.
Yeah. Why do you have to do that?
Oh, here.
Yeah.
So I'm passing in a prop, a background image. So if you want to use, so in the real application, I've basically been trying to come up with a way to use WordPress without having to use SQL or PHP, which I got working. So I was pulling in using GraphQL. If I was using GraphQL, I was pulling in a MySQL query that got the WordPress featured thumbnail. And so the way to make that a background image is you have to do it in line. There's no way around it.
That's like the dynamic example right there. Like you could hypothetically go find some way to get CSS modules to define that style for you and add that class name dynamically or not.
Yeah, but the thing about using a CMS to generate that image is you're not going to know that image all the time. It could change whenever.
Yeah.
So that's why it's
They're really.
But if you're
really dynamic.
Yeah, but if you are using inline styles currently, you can start moving it to a CSS module easily because they can coexist if you want them to. Any other questions?
So is there like a special kind of thought process you have to go through, like writing CSS in this way that's different from how you would just ordinarily write CSS or Sass for that matter?
It makes it a lot easier normally. I mean, let me see if I can pull up keep on connectivity. Let me see if I can pull up an example from like a non-React app.
I think I was missing the same thing. Like if you're writing your JSX and your Sass, they should hook up normally, right? Like I haven't missed anything in the last 6 months. Right. Okay. But this gives you an advantage because you're not using some inline styles to do some dynamic styling.
Well, I mean, so the biggest advantages of using this are, to me personally, they're being able to use pseudo elements, pseudo styles, pseudo selectors. Like if you want to have, let's say you want to have a background image, but you want to have a before element that has like a 50% opacity to make that image darker or something. And you want to have like 2 different background images or something. I mean, you can do that with pseudo elements. With React, you have to create a whole other node in the DOM.
But
you have to have like a whole separate.
Couldn't you just do that in Sass like you would anyways? Like,
yeah. I mean, if you're not using inline styles. But the problem is, so let me,
like if everything was inline, I get that. I know that React depends a lot on inline styles.
So you're talking about using React to generate,
I was wondering,
using Sass to generate a style.
wondering what the killer app of this is. And I was afraid I was missing something, and I still might be. I don't develop React day to day. It was maybe August last time I touched it. But for like the pseudo element problem, I would see that. I would just define that in my static Sass files that would connect at runtime like a normal system would.
Now I'm gonna get to your question. You have a response?
Yeah, correct me if I'm wrong.
Go for it.
I think you might be asking like, why not just give your element, your React component a class name?
Yeah. Well, so this is my point. Like, so this is just a WordPress site that I'm working on, right? And so these are all the classes I have to write. I have to write these out every time I do this, right? Because I can't use React. But like, if you look, these are kind of similar. Like flex column 3-4, flex column, secondary background. Like the benefit of not having to do that is, I mean, if I could write React, I would just have one base class for a column and then, say, I want it to be 3/4 width, and like it automatically writes all those classes. And I mean, if you look, like this is it's probably not the best organized file here, but like to get Flexbox to work like from an atomic CSS standpoint, like I have to write all these like, I mean, this is kind of similar, but you can see like I'm kind of recreating this, but when you're using CSS modules, because your CSS is locally scoped, you don't ever have to worry about changing a class name and having it unintentionally changing a style somewhere where you didn't want to. Whereas here, if I was like, oh, maybe I need like, so some of these are kind of crazy. So like flex column, like nth of type. Every third item it gets padding right too. Like what if I'm like working on a page and I was like, oh, this kind of looks wrong. Let me change it to 1.5. But then, and then that breaks somewhere else. This is probably not a great example of that because that probably would never happen. But if you have like posts or something like that, where you're like, you've got like one page of post excerpts and then one page of posts, like a full post. And they both have post title classes, but one's an excerpt post title where you want it to be smaller and one's bigger. Like you can have the same, using CSS modules, you could have a post excerpt component and then have that class be titled, and have a post component have it be titled, and never have to worry about changing one and have it affect the other. Whereas here you have to do something like, like post excerpt. Right? To like be sure that you're not changing, that you're not messing anything else. I might not be really explaining like the really good benefits of this, but I can tell you as someone who constantly works outside of React on just regular websites on a daily basis, like this is why I've been spending so much time trying to get WordPress to work with React, so I can use CSS modules. I like taught myself GraphQL and Relay, so I can, and because I don't like writing PHP. But like this is the sole reason I'm doing it, because I use WordPress so much at work.
What does your WordPress pipeline look like connecting to React? Do you dump JavaScript through the template, or are you using the API or some sort of AJAX call?
Who's familiar with GraphQL and Relay? They work together. So GraphQL, for those that aren't, I don't want to turn this into like a GraphQL talk, but if you guys are interested, I can talk about it since I've been playing around with it. GraphQL is kind of like a layer on the client side it's like in between the client and the network, and the server. And it basically allows you to, it's like database agnostic querying. If you're familiar with like graph databases, you get like edges. It's really hard to explain. But the benefit, the beauty of it is using, I'm not like a SQL person at all. So there's a node, there's an NPM module called SQLize that basically turns your entire SQL database into a JavaScript objects. And so you can put that into GraphQL and then do all sorts of really, really powerful querying. So if you're familiar with WordPress, you have like built-in query words like get post meta and stuff like that. With GraphQL, you can get like multiple levels of post meta. So like you can get like very, very deep. It's really hard to explain without playing around with it. But to answer your question, my first idea was to use the WordPress API. I started playing around with it. It kind of sucks. Like there's not a lot of endpoints. They give you the ability to write your own endpoints, but it's like really confusing. And so I was like, well, if I can use GraphQL to query any database, I should just probably like try to recreate these queries. And it's been pretty successful. But I'll say that for like that doesn't itself deserve the whole other talk.
Can you come back and give that talk?
I can, absolutely, if you guys want, sure. That's gonna be a long talk. So bring your whatever you bring for a long talk. It's been a long day. I should have had a good joke there, but no. So Who is still not convinced that inline styles are not good? Now, I will say, if you're using React Native, this is not good for you, because you can't obviously use CSS in React Native. I don't use React Native, so I guess you're using inline styles in React Native, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So that's your thing. Are there anyone see any like really glaring problems with this, or want to like argue with me? 'Cause
There's not enough JavaScript, damn it. You left the JavaScript road again. Get back on the road.
And to me, like React, like learning it was really thing from being a front-end developer. I was taught separation of concerns, had great HTML, your CSS, and your JavaScript all separate. And now I'm with you, man. I would like to do everything in JavaScript, but when it's easier, it's easier. So, did you?
I don't want to argue with you. I mean, my only, the only reason I still am partial to inline styles is just because in most cases, the component becomes my composition, the React component.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's probably the strongest argument against this, is that. Now, I mean, I don't know if there's any performance issues, but like, if you have like just 1,000 nodes and you're doing inline styles, doesn't that, I mean, would that cause a problem? Because you're not reusing anything. Every single element has to get the style.
I don't know. Everything I've read, people say that they can't find like noticeable issues with it, but I'm sure if you put enough inline styles enough big enough DOMs.
Yeah. It's probably just, at that point, you're just trying to break it to break it.
Yeah.
Our DOMs, though, I mean, there's mitigating circumstances. Like what looks like an easy forward match is actually like often convoluted by the DOM selection. Like they're just optimized for these like crazy backtrace scenarios that it's too complicated to know. And I feel like way more likely the answer is you're not going to notice any difference for like, you'll probably find problems in either way, but like, no one knows. I don't think I'm not qualified to know.
So the one question that I thought about today, actually, as I was transforms to do animations, and if so, I don't think this would work. I mean, I suppose you could. I use like GSAP or like a JavaScript animation library to do pretty much all my animations because it's JavaScript. But I suppose you could always just do, like changing, like, in a component data update, callback, checking the props, and if something changed, change the class name, and then do the animation that way. I was just wondering if that would be a concern.
That sounds like a good approach.
Yeah. Yes.
So is that the only, like, so transitions and stuff was a big CSS3 thing. Is that the, like, you're talking about animations not working in React? Is it the only thing from CSS that doesn't work in React, or are there?
No, I mean, it absolutely will work. I just think because with this method, it gets difficult to, like, you can't use jQuery. Well, you can, but you have to know the generated class name. So, like, if you want to select the class, I mean, you can probably get away with using, like, a ref in React. But, like, to change a class name using this method is much more difficult than it is just using jQuery. So that's why I've pretty much steered away from doing most CSS animations. I use pretty much all JavaScript animation. GSAP, if you're familiar with it, is very performant. You can do all sorts of crazy SVG animation. And that in itself is the one on the top. That's not even React.
One of the other things would be, hypothetically, I haven't finished building this out. If you wanted to share components across, say, like Android, React Native, iOS, web, presumably maybe there's a Windows phone, using inline styles as if you had that scenario, would be easier to share because you could pull the render and the styles out.
Yeah,
inject them into the components.
Yeah.
If you had that type of.
I mean, I'm using this for Cordova PhoneGap apps. Not not React Native, and there's no problems with it. But yeah, if you are trying to share components with React Native, then this completely is not usable for you. So sorry. Cool. Well, that's all I got. I made the repos public. You can pull it down and fork it, play around with it. It's pretty bare bones. So, and I'll stick around if anyone wants to talk about GraphQL or Relay.